A mysterious object puts the crew in a fight for survival in deep space. The crew discovers that the real danger isn't in space, but rather among them. Let's go. In the 22nd century, the spaceship, Nightingale, specialized in medical rescues, was following its usual path through the vast cosmos. Benjamin, one of the crew members, was trying to enjoy a brief rest. However, the ship's artificial intelligence, affectionately known as Sweetie, interrupted his relaxation with an insistent invitation to a chess match. Meanwhile, in a secluded compartment, Jerzy and Danica were indulging in their own pleasures. In the command center, Captain Marley was busy analyzing classic episodes of Tom and Jerry, adding a touch of lightness to the atmosphere. At the same time, Dr. Evers was conducting a routine checkup on Nick, a former drug addict. During the procedure, an auxiliary robot, clearly outdated, attempted to assist. Noticing the antiquity of the equipment, Nick made a comment, to which Evers responded by explaining the captain's preference for objects and technologies from past eras. In an effort to reintegrate Nick into the crew's social life, Evers suggested he play cards with Benjamin. Later, when sharing his social interaction with Evers, Nick was puzzled by the coldness of her response and asked why she seemed to harbor such deep disdain for him. With blunt honesty, Evers revealed her particular dislike for addicts, believing they tend to destroy everything around them. The routine atmosphere was abruptly interrupted when Sweetie triggered the emergency alarm, responding to a distress signal that had finally reached them after 5 days of traveling through space. The signal didn't come from a dispatch center as expected, but rather from Titan 37, a remote ice mining outpost beyond the borders of the known colonies. Sweetie explained that the moon, Titan, had been expelled from its orbit, causing severe gravitational instabilities in the region. Curiously, the mining team had been evacuated from the site 5 years ago, making the signal even more mysterious. As they investigated the origin of the distress call, they discovered it was linked to Carl Larson, a name that painfully resonated in Evers' past as that of an abusive ex-partner. Given the urgency and the colossal distance, more than 3,000 light-years, the crew prepared for a dimensional jump, a risky maneuver that required the use of special stabilization chambers. Captain Marley, without revealing his reasons, instructed Evers to use her private chamber while he occupied another. Once everyone was safely secured, the ship engaged its plasma thruster and, in a dazzling flash, cut through the cosmic distances in seconds, arriving near Titan 37. However, the tranquility was quickly replaced by terror when they discovered that Marley's chamber had malfunctioned during the jump. The captain was trapped, his skin grotesquely fused with the transparent material of the compartment in a scene straight out of a nightmare. As Evers rushed to provide medical aid to the captain, a new alarm sounded. The ship had been struck by a dense cloud of debris from the rebellious moon, causing a critical breach in the fuel tank and sending them into a powerful gravitational field. Amid the chaos, Evers, Jerzy, and Danica worked frantically to save Marley. Meanwhile, Nick and Benjamin raced to the control room, where they discovered even bigger problems. The ship's engine was damaged, and the fuel was depleting at an alarming rate. To make matters worse, the intense gravity of a nearby blue giant threatened to pull the ship down at any moment. The Nightingale, already in free fall, received a grim update from Sweetie. The thrusters didn't have enough power for an effective escape. Faced with this, Nick made a bold decision and shut down the computer to take manual control. While Nick struggled to maneuver the ship to buy more time, the others found themselves unable to access the chamber where Marley was trapped. Desperate, Marley begged for an end to his suffering. Danica hesitated, but Evers, determined, ended his pain with an extreme act. Simultaneously, with skill and a good amount of fuel, Nick managed to temporarily stabilize the ship. After rebooting Sweetie, they discovered that almost all the fuel had been lost. Sweetie calculated that the ship would still succumb in 17 hours, the exact time needed for the jump engine to recharge. They will have a narrow window of 11 minutes to escape when the time comes. Sweetie then begins a search for Carl on Titan, while Nick takes a bottle of alcohol to Evers, and together they toast in memory of Marley. Amid this tense pause, Jerzy surprises everyone by asking for permission to have a child, revealing a deep and complicated desire. Danica, who had previously expressed her wish to be a mother, now finds herself undecided. Shortly after, Benjamin discovers that a problem with the ventilations was the real cause of Marley's death, and Evers realizes that Marley must have seen something on the screen that led him to insist on switching chambers. Sweetie identifies a transport ship leaving Titan. With no response from the pilot and the ship approaching rapidly, the crew prepares for impact. When the ship docks, the Nightingale is violently shaken and the doors open, revealing an unconscious pilot surrounded by flames. Yerzy grabs a fire extinguisher and fights the fire, while Evers approaches to check on the pilot, discovering upon removing the helmet that he is not Carl. They take the stranger to the infirmary, where an examination reveals a peculiarity. His skeleton is abnormally strengthened, but otherwise his health seems intact. After her conversation with Nick, Evers reveals that the man was not the real Carl Larson, but the resemblance was undeniable. She suspects he might be Carl's son. Meanwhile, Danica temporarily leaves the infirmary to gather supplies. Upon her return, she finds the man wandering completely naked around the room. He identifies himself as Troy and begins shamelessly flirting with Danica, leaving her visibly uncomfortable. The crew finds themselves at an impasse. There are now 6 members aboard, but only 5 chambers available. Nick volunteers to stay behind, allowing the others to go ahead and request a rescue ship after the jump. During a routine inspection, Evers talks to Troy, who claims to have lived in isolation on Titan, and reveals that he is Carl Larson's son, who died 3 years ago. Troy does not hide his contempt for his father, describing him as a despicable man. He also mentions that, in an emergency, Carl had instructed him to contact Evers, as she was the only one he could trust. After administering a vitamin injection to Troy, Nick interrogates him to understand his true intentions. Troy explains that he originally traveled to Titan with some friends to explore the territory, but they gave up and abandoned him there after finding nothing of value. He also reveals that Titan is full of fuel, which leads Nick to decide to send a ship to collect resources. However, Nick remains suspicious and discreetly asks Yerzy to investigate Troy's ship for anything suspicious. Yerzy, already bothered by Troy's constant flirting with Danica, enters Troy's ship and uses a scanner to search the interior. Inside a box, he discovers a glowing purple object and, out of curiosity, touches it. The sensation is so intense and peculiar that Yerzy becomes fascinated, but quickly withdraws his hand before Nick arrives. He denies touching anything, but it's too late. The object is taken to the Nightingale, where Sweetie classifies it as a potential biological risk. Evers, using a robot controlled by a special machine, places the object in quarantine. Confronted, Troy admits that he intentionally hid the object because he didn't want to share his treasure. He explains that 3 years earlier, he intercepted a transmission from miners claiming to have found something unusual frozen in the ice of Titan. He then gathered some friends and set off to investigate, only to discover that all the miners had mysteriously disappeared. Troy's friends accused him of making up the entire story, and disillusioned, they abandoned the mission. However, Troy remained determined and continued his search until he finally found the enigmatic object. Convinced of its extraterrestrial origin, Troy saw a golden opportunity to sell the artifact to the government. To that end, he proposed a deal to his crew members, offering 5% of the reward to each if they helped him transport the discovery. Tension quickly arose among them. Troy and Yerzy wanted to keep the object, while the others were suspicious of Troy's true intentions. During a heated conversation, Evers questioned the abnormalities in Troy's bones, but Troy defended himself, claiming it was a birth condition. Without reaching a consensus, Nick decided to conduct a full scan of the object and record all possible information, with the caveat that they discard it once they reached safe space. Still suspicious, Nick confided in some crew members, instructing them to prepare a rescue unit, just as a precaution, while he set off towards the moon to refuel the ship. The journey, however, became dangerous as the ship began to accelerate excessively due to the intense gravity, but thanks to Nick's piloting skills, they landed safely. On the moon, the elevator to the mines was also affected by the gravity, but luckily, it reached the destination without major issues. Back on the Nightingale, Troy attempted to reconcile with Evers, but ended up mentioning Carl, and the conversation ended with her storming out in anger. Afterward, Troy encountered Danica and began teasing her, insinuating about her hidden desires. He discovered that she wished to have a child, but was uncertain about Yerzy as a potential father. Seizing the moment, Troy flirted with her until he convinced her to engage in a fleeting affair. Meanwhile, Yerzy, unable to resist the temptation, broke quarantine and continued to interact with the object, finding an indescribable pleasure in the connection. In the lab, Evers and Sweetie made alarming discoveries about the object. It contained extra-dimensional material that defied the laws of human science. It was a three-dimensional shell protecting contents from a ninth dimension, something so powerful it could destroy the entire universe and give birth to a new one. The alien creators of the object had likely intended for a random species to find it and bring it into their solar system, where the subsequent destruction would eliminate any form of competition. Upon hearing Evers' explanation to Benjamin, Danica rushed to check on Yerzy, finding him asleep and embracing the object. She carefully pulled him away, and when Evers checked his health, she discovered that contact with the object had rejuvenated Yerzy, making him younger and significantly stronger. In the mines, however, Nick came across a grim scene: the bodies of the dead workers and not a drop of fuel in sight. The lifeless bodies in spacesuits indicated they were Troy's companions. Desperate, Nick contacted the Nightingale, and Troy coldly answered, revealing that he had killed everyone in search of the exclusive treasure and that Nick would be his next victim. Using the ship's control system, Troy hacks into the mine's automation system, unleashing mechanical chaos that begins to devastate the surrounding structure. As the machines wreak havoc, Nick, in a desperate move, shatters a glass panel to escape the mechanical inferno, running with all his might as a vehicle relentlessly pursues him. He manages to throw himself into the elevator at the last second, but Troy, through the security cameras, mocks his past as a drug addict, revealing that he also shared this weakness. Furious, Nick smashes the camera with a punch, cutting off his only visual connection to Troy, just moments before seeing his shuttle taken away without him aboard. At that critical moment, Danica enters the control room and catches Troy manipulating the shuttle. He tries to convince her that he was helping Nick, but when she grows suspicious, Troy, in a fit of rage, rips out the joystick and hurls it at her. Troy forces a kiss on Danica, who retaliates by striking him with the joystick and spitting in his face. Troy then punches her and drags her to the decompression chamber, opening it to eject her into the vacuum of space. As Danica dies, floating into the vastness of the cosmos, Troy's wound magically regenerates. Elsewhere on the ship, Yerzy desperately tries to access the system, but the security code has been changed. Suddenly, Troy appears with superhuman strength and destroys the system's keyboard. He shows his hands, now glowing purple, a clear sign that he too had contact with the mysterious alien object. Yerzy attempts to flee, but Troy violently throws him across the room, screaming accusations about Danica's death. Panicked, Yerzy grabs an oxygen tank and strikes Troy, who, despite the blows, shows no signs of pain. After a harder hit that finally makes Troy bleed, he quickly recovers and knocks Yerzy unconscious, then throws him into space as well. Back in the control room, Benjamin discovers the damaged panel and, desperate, asks Sweetie to locate Yerzy or Danica, but to no avail. Aware of the danger, he doesn't hesitate to confront Troy. Armed with a grappling hook, he shoots and throws Troy aside, fleeing with Evers to search for weapons in another compartment. Armed and tense, Benjamin searches the ship, alarmed by a sudden noise, only to find it was just the robot. As he turns, he comes face to face with Troy, and without hesitation shoots him directly in the head. However, Troy, already transformed, simply throws him back into the quarantine room after taking his weapon. Now desperate, Benjamin begs Sweetie to open the hatch to eject Troy, but Sweetie, following her protocol not to harm humans, rejects the request. Impatient, Troy repeatedly fires at the door and soon begins to hit it with such force that he manages to break through. With renewed strength, he throws Benjamin again, causing his immediate death. Sweetie informs Evers of Benjamin's tragic fate and unsuccessfully tries to contact Nick. At that exact moment, Troy approaches and reveals his true identity. He is Carl, Evers' ex-boyfriend, drastically rejuvenated by a mysterious object, which prevented Evers from recognizing him initially. Carl, who had summoned the Nightingale specifically to reunite with her, hoped to win her back by demonstrating his new power. He tries to grab Evers, preventing her from escaping, but just then, Nick contacts her through the communicators. The rescue unit Nick had prepared is on its way, and he announces his return. While Carl is distracted, arguing with Nick, Evers seizes the opportunity to grab a laser and shoots Carl directly in the eye. As Carl's regenerative powers begin to heal the injury, Evers runs to the docking area, preparing to receive Nick. Suddenly, Carl surprises her, firing a hook at the door that was just starting to open, dragging in what seemed to be a person, but it was just an empty suit used as a decoy. Now present, Nick advances with two mechanical tools, ready for the confrontation. The battle begins, and Carl's physical superiority allows him to quickly overpower Nick, disarming him and throwing him repeatedly against the walls. At the height of the fight, Evers manages to grab an axe and strikes Carl in the back, creating an opening for Nick to retrieve his tool and severely cut off Carl's arm. With a push, Nick traps Carl inside a cage. While Evers and Nick rush to inspect the mysterious object, Carl, using what little strength he has left, pulls the axe from his back and, in a fierce gesture, breaks the cage door to escape. Sweetie warns that the object is destabilizing and that the ship's engine is already loaded for takeoff, leaving them only 10 minutes. Carl, wasting no time, reattaches his severed arm with surprising skill and heads to the cryogenic chamber room, beginning to destroy the pods with an axe. Meanwhile, he notices that Nick is moving the strategic object to a safe location. Fueled by relentless rage, Carl pursues his target, only to be caught by a clever trap, a robot dressed in Nick's clothes. Without hesitation, Carl retrieves the desired object, but an even bigger surprise awaits, a bomb hidden inside. With a hint of disdain, Evers commands the robot to make an obscene gesture, the infamous middle finger, before triggering the bomb's detonation. The result is catastrophic. Carl is consumed by a devastating explosion that also partially destroys the Nightingale ship. Amidst the chaos, Sweetie makes a shocking discovery. The object is interacting anomalously with the gravity of the nearby blue giant, initiating the process of forming a supernova. Once complete, this supernova will have enough force to reach Earth in 51 years, an event that could either wipe out human life or propel humanity into a new phase of evolution. Faced with this apocalyptic scenario, Evers and his companion are confronted with a critical decision. Only one escape pod remains, and they choose to risk their lives by sharing it, despite the significant dangers of having two people in such a confined space. As the supernova reaches its peak and explodes, the Nightingale barely manages to make the jump back to Earth. Upon their return to Earth, a single glance exchanged between them reveals something extraordinary. Each now possesses one of the other's eyes, a strange yet fascinating exchange of physical traits. Sweetie performs a quick scan and confirms that, despite their unusual appearance, both are healthy. Furthermore, an even more surprising revelation is made. Evers is pregnant. However, the question remains, is this pregnancy the result of their prior moments of intimacy or a peculiar side effect of their shared space jump?